Welcome to Archetype. We're back. It's a Tuesday, and you're with me, Ashley. This section is sponsored by Lenovo, of course. And if you were with us last week, you knew that we were blocking out our group archetype. And so we're just going to continue blocking that guy out and getting some finalized details and stuff, and kind of talk about more of the finalizing process for this guy. So let me get into it. So just to show you guys again, some reference that I had. Obviously, I usually tend to just pull up kind of reference as I go along. But my main reference I try to keep kind of limited, just so again I'm not looking at a million different things while I'm trying to design stuff. And so I was actually just mentioning that, so before we want to do the steampunk arm, and I'm not quite sure what I want to do with it yet. So it's one of those things where I think trying to go in and finalize some other areas of the sculpt might help me kind of figure out what it is that I kind of want from this thing and see what we can kind of come up with. For now, I'm going to block in, though, that it's some sort of like big steampunk hand. So I'm just going to say it's something like that, maybe. You know, have some like cool like steampunk asymmetry, and we'll maybe make it a little more blocky and stuff like that. But for now, I'm just going to leave that so I can kind of see the silhouette and see if, you know, certain parts are working and things like that. But yeah, I kind of wanted to go in, like try to finalize this shirt and do things like that and see if I can finalize some of these other assets to see if I can start getting a more finalized feel and seeing if there's something that kind of clicks with me. Again, we're keeping it kind of medieval mostly, and then adding like that little element of steampunk to stuff. So yeah, I'm hoping that that'll help me as we continue working and designing on this dude. So shout out in the chat and say hi. You know, I always like questions, and I always like seeing people, you know, saying hi and being there. And yeah, we're gonna get into it. So I picked a blue-yellow color palette because I like Vegeta. No, in reality, trying to think of our last character, which is our Joker character, which I could pull up actually in a separate subtool just to kind of remind everybody what we're trying to do, basically the opposite of, right? So let's see if I can read this properly. Yeah, I love this kid. So we'll load this dude in. Right, so we have this guy who's got kind of like reds and greens. So if we're looking at stuff for the opposite of that, then we could go for, you know, maybe blues, warmer-ish colors, or like yellows could be interesting. So just trying to do something that feels opposite of this character, right? And so that's kind of like my thought process on trying to pick some interesting colors for this character. But we'll see what ends up staying, what ends up going. But for now, I'm just gonna hide some of the colors here so I can see what I'm doing on this piece of clothing here. So I split it up into different polygroups, so that way later I can go back and select and make things easier for myself when it comes to detailing and adding like cool textures and stuff to it. Making sure that I have nice seam lines and things like that for our character sculpt. So I'm gonna go ahead and start kind of adding some fun stuff into here. And as you know, I do a lot of hard surfacing and finalizing and stuff just within ZBrush itself. I don't usually find a whole lot of reason to venture out of this program most of the time, just because there's so many tools already in here to help me. And I don't like the whole importing, exporting thing. So when we make our arm and things like that, you'll see that I'm going to try to stay in just like the hard surface ZBrush ZModeler. Start adding some folds and stuff and trying to think about where You know, is it really tight or is it billowy? Where would it be pinching and things like that? These jackets are also, or at least my reference that I have, they're very poofy and kind of a little stiff too. So I'm not going to add too many big folds. I want the shape to kind of retain the same. But then within all the stitching and stuff, from one piece of cloth to the other, because they're 4 separate pieces, you know, we're going to add some more interesting detailing and stuff like that. And then I'll also add on top of that, once I kind of finalize where the structure is going to sit, we'll add some trimming and stuff to that as well. Just trying to feel out where that shirt is going to stretch out. It'll probably squish, you know, when it's sitting around things that are hard surface, so such as like the belt and stuff like that. We can make the belt a little tighter to the surface to make sure that it'll sit nice and tight. It's okay if it sinks in a little bit. It's actually probably a good idea to kind of sink it in a little bit, so that way we have some more depth to kind of play with. So if I push this in more, because it's probably, you know, if you wear like a backpack or if you wear a strap or something, it's resting on your skin really, or it's sitting on your body, and then everything else is getting displaced out of that. So I think that's one thing that a lot of artists kind of tend to forget, is we try to make it perfectly floating above stuff. But it's okay for now to not do that, because I want to be able to play with the depth, make sure that I can, you know, sculpt in. So if I up-res this a bit and I start carving away into the folds, you can see it'll look like it's kind of squishing. And that's just going to be easier to do than it is to try to like sculpt it out. So I can squish this in, and you'll see it feels like it already is kind of like sitting within the shirt, because in reality it's being held by the body, not by the shirt. And the shirt's something that's organic that can kind of move around, this inorganic object. And then depending on how, you know, this shoulder pauldron is going to sit, we can kind of adjust where the tension will be on that too. So this is all kind of stuff that it seems, you know, well, I don't want to say it seems minor, but it's all this stuff that you want to think about as you're kind of finalizing sculpts, and like where, you know, if you put on a shoulder pauldron, where does that sit? Where is it actually colliding with you? You know, and how's that going to affect the belts and stuff that is strapped to it? Again, a lot of stuff for games or for when you're making 3D models, yes, stuff can crash, but I try my best to not make it crash, just because it's you know, that's just kind of keep it grounded and keep it feeling real. Because if you can help, you know, grounding that and make it feel like it really can sit on top of this character's shoulder and not just having a bunch of parts crashing into one another, that'll help you a lot. And especially it'll help later too, when, you know, if you have to get rid of stuff for games or whatever it might be, everything will be just sitting a little cleaner. A lot of stuff gets stitched together at the end of, you know, like type of game pipelines, depending on what you're doing. So, you know, the cleaner the better. Always help with stuff like that. Press this now, so I can go in with the standard brush and kind of start carving some of these zigzags. Good rule of thumb usually for sculpting folds are going to be your Y folds, right? It's going to be your crisscross folds, so it's going to be like an X. And that's usually seen on like more sleeves and shoulders, or on long sleeve shirts and things. And then there's going to be kind of like your V's. But a lot of it's just thinking about, you know, where is the shirt getting tucked in, what it's colliding with, where's the tension coming from, and how the cloth is going to sit on your character. All that stuff to keep in mind. there's going to be a lot of probably pinching, you know, in here because there's going to be the belt, and then there's also, you know, where his shoulder is intersecting into his sleeve and things like that. And I'm not going to work too much probably on this side quite yet because I don't know exactly what we're going to be doing on this side. We have an idea, or I have some ideas, but I'm not entirely sure. So a lot of this could potentially change. But for now, I wanted to kind of just sculpt in. I know that there's going to be built, and I know that there's going to be, you know, some sort of shoulder pauldron that'll sit there, but how it's going to connect down below, we've got to get them figure out. Sin, hello, Sin. I'm not alone. Thanks for being the first to say hi. I appreciate it, as always. Happy Tuesdays. Thank goodness it stopped raining. That's what I'm excited about. I have puppies, as you can see, maybe in the back, sleeping, and they get really muddy when they go outside if it's raining. So it's nice to have the sun come out and be able to do some stuff. Maybe one day it'll be a little warmer too. So I'm going to subdivide that again, and now I'm also going to, I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to go back down to a lower subdivision level. And what I can do is, I'm going to select these loops here, where I kind of want trimming. I'm not going to worry about the neck trimming. Normally I would, because I would have trimming, but it's going to get covered with this kind of like cloth hood piece later anyway, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. I'm going to invert this, and then I'm going to delete higher, solo that out, and then what we can do is we can give these a little bit of thickness. So we can extrude that out. Extrude it in, extrude it out. I gotta make this all one polygroup. That might help. And pull that out. Okay. What I can decide to do before subdividing it is a lot of time what I'll do is I'll do the creasing stuff, which is what I do for art surfacing as well, but you can do it for stuff like this. So if you don't want the edge to get super, super smooth, you want it to stay nice and clean and crisp, you can crease the edges based off of polygroups. But what you also can do is you can change how much of that is going to crease. So if I lower the crease level to 2, and then you do a subdivision level of 3, it'll actually smooth it out just a little bit more. And so I like to control how much it's going to smooth based on creasing. So that's a little helpful. We have a question from Twitch. It says, why has it got such little hands? It's just chipmunk things. It is just chipmunk things. Well, last stream, if you were here or not here, my original concept was that he had really big hands, which we can still play with, but I like the idea of him having some bit of a smaller hand and then having like this big steampunk hand, and it gives kind of a cool contrast, as you can see in the silhouette. His hands could get a little bit bigger if we wanted to, but that's stuff that we can always play with later. For now, I don't really mind silhouette wise it feeling or looking a little smaller, because his head's also pretty small. So we can kind of play with that stuff later as it gets more and more finalized, and seeing if it's something that we, want to make a change to or not. So now that I have subdivisions and the proper colors for it, I can now actually go in here and select this color. This one. I'm going to fill this with this blue, and then I'll fill the yellows. Yellow. So now we have nice hard surface. What I'll probably do is I'll probably grab this and expand that. And I'll probably just turn this into a kind of more muted any color, just so that way the inside doesn't, you know, compete. I was gonna say combat or compete, but I've combined the two words with the outside. And then his trim can be a different color. Yeah, hopefully Twitch says hopefully face palms with the correct hand, and I sure hope so too. Probably wouldn't end up very well for our well friend, but maybe that's how I got stronger. Who knows? Question from Facebook. Oh my gosh, I haven't seen a Facebook question. What is the time or deadline, more or less, for a character like this style working block out in high poly? Maybe 1 week. It really does depend. For a character like this, doing and finishing a high poly can take, you know, if I'm working on it on a 40-hour work week, could take 1 to 2 weeks or longer. It really just kind of depends. And also sometimes, you know, depending on the studio we're at, you may just get more time. Some studios just kind of allow for more time. But yeah, usually I would say around 1 to 2 weeks or something like that. It's being weird about selecting symmetry on the other side. I'm actually selecting a loop, and then I'm going to create and invert it and then up-res it, mask it. But yeah, it really does depend on what your client's asking for, or what the deadline is for, you know, your game res character. Film characters can take longer because they're usually more high res and like super detailed. You know, if you're looking at something like, you know, Planet of the Apes level type stuff, then yeah, you're gonna look at something that's much, much longer to take. But for a stylized character like this, yeah, I would say 2 to 3 weeks is fair. That's my guess. By how long I would take to make sure that it's looking nice and clean. So I'm masking, so what I'm doing is I'm selecting an edge loop lower in the subdivision, and then I invert it and I bring it back up to the highest subdivision, mask it, and I bring it back. And then when I invert it, I kind of have this nice perfect seam. So then I am hiding the mask, and I'm going in with like play buildup. And I'm just sculpting in the seam. Oh, that's why. I was like, why? My move brush is getting super weird, and that's because my move brush got all funky, so I gotta reset my brushes. Sometimes that happens to me, and I'm not actually sure why it happens, but my smooth brush will turn into a move brush, and then it kind of like breaks on me. It was just ZBrush things. The other side. You can see that this way we have actually get like really nice clean seam lines. And for, you know, for just a high res like this, I don't mind sculpting that way. Obviously it depends on, you know, what kind of work you're doing. But in this case, I feel like that works for me to create seam lines that kind of feel like that. And now what I'll do is I'll do one in the middle as well. And then I can also select this one, and I'll do the same right now to the back. You might as well. Because so this shirt is made up of, you know, different textures and stuff. So at each seam line, there's going to be an entirely different texture. So I want to make sure that, you know, the seams are going to be nice and clean. And if I wanted to, I could actually polygroup these later. For me, they're easy enough to select. It's not too bad, but I could polygroup these later so I can colorize them, which I'll probably do. Just so that way they're a lot easier to manipulate and to control. Bring that back. Convert that. If this seam line seems too much, that's okay. I can actually go back later and I can pinch it in later. But I just like having the clean seam line to start with first, and then I can go in and fix it later. Especially with stuff like this where our high-res geometry, I like to keep it clean, but at the end of the day, it doesn't actually, you know, matter because we will be creating a, you know, for games at least, you'd be creating a low poly. So for me, it's just easier to kind of have control of stitches this way, and it's faster. Now, if I wanted to, I could go down to that lower subdivision level, and I can pinch this. It also adds a little bit of imperfection, which is totally normal too. I mean, this is medieval times or steampunky times, so these things aren't going to be perfect, and it's okay for them to not be perfect. So I can go in here and pinch this stuff a little bit if I want to. Because I used edge loops to select, I can always reselect. I can always reselect and make it a little smaller. What brush am I using to create the seam? I'm just using the clay build-up brush, and I'm just pushing it down. You could technically use any brush that just pushes stuff down. I just like the clay build-up brush because it feels more uniform. No, what happened? You suck. I have to kind of smooth this out again and probably do this one again. And that's the other thing too, is I don't know where I messed up on that one, but that's okay. I'll show you what happens when I must have had symmetry on when I moved something. And that's part of why I like this process too, is because it's actually not that hard to redo if I do mess up on something like that. Okay, so since I did something funky there, I can just select it again. Oh, it's okay. It's being really funky. Let's keep going back. Oh, ZBrush. It tries to read. So the issue is you gotta smooth all this stuff out, kind of each subdivision level, especially when you're pushing it this much. Because I probably accidentally moved it around or something, but that's okay. Okay, now that I'm at the highest of the vision level, now I shouldn't be getting that issue anymore. I go back down to my lowest. Let's try to fix that again. And I can just push it back down. Yay. So yeah, thinking about, again, showing you that it actually is pretty easy to refix seams, which is what I like about this too. So, you know, I like to put in the seams, but if I'm sculpting and something gets kind of like messed up along the way, that's okay, because I can just smooth it out and kind of like redo it later as well. So this process just makes that kind of easy. But it's also still like very clean. So yeah, so now what I'll do is I'm going to go down to that subdivision 4, which I've been selecting all the loops on. I know I've been selecting this and selecting this one. Oops. By the way, I'm selecting edge loops by, instead of the rectangle selection tool, I'm using the lasso. You can only do it in the lasso tool. And you just hover over an edge and it'll loop select. So, I'm going to go ahead and select all these. I'm going to invert it, and I can bring this down to the lowest subdivision. Oops. I lied. And then bring it up to the lowest subdivision. And then I can hit Control W to polygroup all that. So now if I mask it and invert it, you can see I still have all my nice seam lines like that. And so now when I turn on color, I can fill this with a dark seam or something like that. Let's see what that looks like. If I wanted to, I could go in and make sure that, I don't have that inside selected, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to fill it. Or we can also have it be just the same color just to make it easier. Yeah, little fix. Someone said, oh, it's nice to see, what happens when something goes wrong. And yeah, something's always going to go slightly wrong. So it's okay to, need to be able to go back and fix. But that's again why I use certain methods. It's just a lot easier to go back and fix that stuff. And you set it up, in that way, kind of expecting errors almost, kind of just trying to work smarter. So I have some seam brushes in here that I could kind of play with and see what we can get out of it. Let's see. I don't know which one I really want to use, but you can always find like a bunch of, I think this one might work. We'll see. It seems good. And sometimes I like using seam brushes, and then sometimes I don't. I'm not always the biggest fan of having to sit and like do like really technical like detailing stuff with seam brushes. I kind of like sculpting them myself, but we'll see what I can get out of it. If I can just stay within the cracks, which I could turn on. Lazy radius. I could turn on the lazy radius now, so I can turn up this intensity a little bit and see what we get. You can see you get like really tiny little folds. But for me, because we're doing stylized stuff, like you're not really probably gonna be able to see that. Which is where probably going in here with like a standard brush or the gaming standard brush and starting to add some of your own stuff might help a little bit. I'm actually going to pinch these also a little bit more. I'm going to try to inflate on either side, or just do like a clay buildup or something like that. So again, I can use that same method that I've been using, where I can kind of work on either side of this. So I can select this edge, and this edge. Or actually, if I was smart, I would pick this. And then I would hit Control-Shift-X to expand it. So I expanded it one loop, and I'm going to get rid of the seam. I'll press it, mask it, bring it back, invert it. Now I have a little edge along the seam, so now if I hide it and I do a clay buildup, I can build up this side of it. I clear my mask accidentally. Sorry, masking can be weird sometimes. For detailing, I mean, I do this stuff also. Just note that I do this stuff because I have really shaky hands. So my super shaky hands are not very helpful when it comes to detailing stuff. So I kind of need as much help as I can get to make it nice and clean. That's totally okay. Every method has its own madness. Turn off the color for a bit. The yellow is a little bad. Let's get rid of those gross messages in the chat. Those aren't questions and they aren't about art. Sweet, thank you. Yeah, you can see that I can easily just use the clay buildup and create like a nice little seam line. You can see how easy it is for me to just smooth it out and just create some detailing. Or you could do the inflate brush or whatever it is that's comfortable for you to use. Oops. Bring back my color. So for this, I also, I'm feeling like this yellow. And I think it's just too yellow. It's driving me a little crazy. I want to maybe a little bit more ochre, a little less crazy on the color. That'll help a little bit. So the other thing too now is, you know, this is at a subdivision level 7, but I can go ahead and detail this, and as long as I make it subdivision level 7 as well, I can always merge them down later together, and then I can sculpt on top of them. But I'm going to do the same method for his tree here. So I can subdivide this a few times. I can go back to, you know, a lower subdivision. Oh, someone says the YouTube chat doesn't seem to be updating. I wish I could help you with that. Okay, so between those two, I invert it, go up the subdivision level, that's it. And you can kind of see here if this is going to be enough thickness or not. Be really weird now about masking, which is a little crazy. Yeah, you can see it. You kind of preview what your seam line would look like before you start carving into it. And in this case, you could also go to the mesh center. Go to mesh center. You can scale it down probably, and you'll get something pretty looking pretty quickly. You can Control H to hide it to see if it's going to be too much or too little. So, see if we can get some decent trimming along the edges of that. If this is too harsh, you can always kind of smooth it out later if you wanted to. I could up this look again. Pretty smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and delete one subdivision level. So I have 7, it's just too many. So I'm going to delete one higher. And then now that these are both 6 and 6, I can merge these down. Say okay. And you'll see that it will reconstruct the subdivision levels. And now I have both of them on here. I inverted, but that's okay. I can just go to select that one. And a little bit. Expand. Expanded it. And now I can go to highest order and put it. Oh no, it's being so dumb. It wants to be really dumb right now. So I'm going to do that. It wants to be dumb. I'll let it be dumb. So there's a couple ways you can, kind of fix this. Is you can split it again. So you can go to the subdivision level and split it. Again, all of the ZBrush is actually pretty editable, which is nice. So now I have 2 of these. I'm going to delete one. And I have this one, just like that, and that one's fine. The whole polygroup's got messed up, but that's okay. Anything else to fix later. So now knowing that this is flipped, I'm just going to flip this before. There we go. And now I can merge down. So Seth has a question. Since it's asking if you add seams before finalizing folds and have the skull folds over seams, is there a way to do that without destroying seams? So what's actually kind of nice is you can actually do it one way or the other, depending on what brush you use. So for, if I sculpt seams first, and then I use like the standard brush and just kind of brush over it, it actually will keep the seams pretty well. It'll still always like slightly bring stuff up. You can kind of mess stuff up a little bit, but it's not noticeable. But I usually recommend seams kind of coming last onto your stuff. They are kind of a pain to go back and fix and like adjust later. I'm probably more picky about my seams than most people. Some people just sculpt in seams with the thing and standard brush and call it a day, and you can totally do that too. I just tend to be a little more picky. Yeah, it's definitely personal preference, and it's also whatever makes sense to you as well. That's gonna, get the job done. And for certain games and stuff too, like you wouldn't even be making seams in your high res, you would probably be doing it just in your low res, or something like that as well. Like just seam textures, it's easier to just use it as a texture than it is to really like sculpt it too. So there's tons of different methods. It's really just going to be dependent on what the project's calling for. In this case, because we're kind of making, I'm pretending, because that's what we did last stream, was making basically like a maquette. I'm just trying to sculpt in as much detail as I feel like I need. So most of the time, though, I'll actually just use sculpting or CNC texturing. So since it says that you would use layers in ZBrush, and yeah, layers are great. They're really only good for stuff like blend shapes or something like that, where you're just temporarily kind of adjusting meshes and stuff. Because the other issue with layers is there's tons of like sculpting stuff. Like once you start using layers, you can't stop using layers because you constantly have to be recording on a layer, and that's the part that can be really frustrating. So you can see I can sculpt on top of these seams and they'll stay, just like someone was asking in the chat earlier. I think that was Sin asking. But I can kind of sculpt on top of this stuff and it'll stay. I actually kind of like this texture I'm creating just by kind of like making it open. So you kind of make a bumpy outer edge, you know, give some textural detail. It's funny because I'm actually using the side, I'm sculpting the side that I won't see. So I'll sculpt on the side. Yeah, using layers can be helpful for some cases, and then in other cases it can be a total pain to go back and try to like adjust that stuff and fix it later. Sorry, I hit the Genius. I gotta drink coffee too. Drinking coffee is really important. Can I keep sculpting and drink coffee at the same time? I very rarely work like this. I don't hold coffee. I'm like trying to sculpt and coffee at the same time. It's interesting. Shout out to all the coffee drinkers out there. So I'm just kind of creating like rippled, a fold like trim effect here. Again, you could do this in a texture map later if you really wanted to, but I personally like just sculpting. I think it's fun. Just adding some fun textural detail. Just supposed to feel like it's kind of like crinkly. And you can go in and kind of crinkle all this stuff. I think it's nice to know how to do it, you know, through texture, but I think it's way more fun and also kind of valuable to know how to make, you know, that texture that you're looking for on your own as well, like while you're just purely sculpting. I like to see how much I can get away with just, you know, purely just sculpting stuff. Again, if I needed to go back and edit those seam lines, it's really easy to, so I can, I'm actually going to get, so these polygroups are really wild now because I went down my little subdivision. Expand that. I'm going to go ahead and expand again. I'll go to that subdivision level. Because the topology is the same, even though I'm doing it asymmetrically, the topology is the same, so I can kind of keep it even, but it's so negligible when it comes to like, you know, what's really different versus what's not. So see now that I have this, now I could go in if I wanted to. I'm going to hide my mask. I could either do like a polish, flatten out, You can kind of see it flattening, right? I hope you guys can. You guys can see the seam flattening back out. Maybe you don't want the crinkly seam, maybe you just want the inside part. And I could have masked this first and then did it, or whatever it is, or you can, and that's kind of like the point of showing this stuff is I don't have to have like my final, like, oh, this is my idea, this is how I'm going to do it. Because if you find a method that you like, or if you find a technique that's working for you, then you can go back and kind of like adjust that stuff later. It's all supposed to be interchangeable with each other. And that's kind of more of a point than anything else. I make this feel like it's not super fluffy. Well, it's fluffy, but it's tight. My reference that I'm looking at, if I bring it over, has a bunch of really kind of like smaller, tighter wrinkles. It's got a lot of smooth surfaces, but you can see there's kind of some cool stretching that's going on the tops of the shoulders here that I like, that I'm going to try to add. You can see that there's kind of like this cool crumpling. And then a lot of it also happens along like the seam lines and then like where the belt's gonna sit. I can add a lot of cool little details like that. So that's what I'm gonna try to, kind of sculpt and do right now. So some of these might feel a little too big, so I can go back and I can kind of smooth this out a little bit. Also, if you don't want to smooth out your poly paint, you can just make sure that when you hold the shift button, you can just turn off RGB. And now when I smooth it, I can smooth out, across my poly paint and not worry about my poly paint getting all messed up. I'm not gonna make super small wrinkles because again, it's a stylized character. So I'm trying to be good about not zooming in too far yet. I don't want to go into here and be like, yeah, these little wrinkles, get in here. Doesn't really make much sense, right? We'll be viewing it from something like that. So I want to make sure that the wrinkles that I'm doing are very, very visible to the view that it's going to be most viewed in. Which means those wrinkles aren't going to get super, super tiny. And start creating those wrinkles that kind of go across as well. This is where that smooth directional brush can really come into play. So I'll use the smooth directional brush so that way I can smooth the forms this way, but kind of get rid of them when they go this way. But they'll keep the folds that are going in the opposite direction. It's all about the directionality in which you're smoothing. So that's really helpful. So I kind of want this to feel, I feel like it's kind of crinkling in on itself a little bit. So I'm going to sculpt in so it feels like some harder, crispy edges. And I think that's the one thing about like printing or maquette making is like don't be afraid to really carve and like get in there. You'd be surprised how just carving harder is actually going to make your stuff a lot better, a lot cleaner. To be honest, sure. Most people will probably think that's a snowboarding reference or something. Go ahead and put tightness into what the seams are, because again, it's stitched together, so now it's being held. So if you think about what you've a lot of the pulling and stuff on tight seams. There's going to be a lot of like little seam work going on there, a lot of tension. You can see I get little dots, so I'm going to turn down my lazy step. That should be a little bit. There's going to be tons of little wrinkles and stuff too that are going to be, you know, sitting on that belt. So I'm going to make sure that, you know, I can take a bigger brush and make sure that the piece as a whole has like a big crease where the belt is. I haven't paid much love to the back here, have I? You can see how I can, you know, to answer some question before, you can see how I can sculpt on top of the seams that I already have, and they still stay pretty good. Not every brush is going to do that, like clay buildup's not, because the point of buildup is that it's actually building up the lowest recessed parts of your sculpt first and then adding on top. So obviously stuff like that, you'll see will get rid of the seam, whereas the standard brush builds it all up at once, so it'll still keep all that evenness. So it's really handy for stuff like this. And you can see a lot of my stuff is more of like V shapes or X shapes, you know, depending and thinking about like where those folds are. And thinking about the body underneath, you know, if his lat is here, you're not going to see any folds at the most tense part of the part that's touching his skin. You're going to see it on the parts that are yeah, there are definitely brushes that are friendlier for this, like you said. So yeah, just be aware of, you know, which brushes you're using, you know, and which ones, and you'll tell immediately because the work will be gone if you use the wrong brushes. Go ahead and use some pull with the stuff to feel like it's pulling from the top as well. So I'm going to smooth out this a little bit. I want to feel like there's intensity, pulling or tugging that's happening from the top of his shoulder as well. You can see how we feel like there's certain tautness in certain pieces, and I think that really helps sell the idea of, you know, like what kind of material this is and, you know, how it fits your character. And this is a very different type of, you know, tightness or fit than, you know, like what we sculpted last time, which was just like a big hooded cloak. You know, so keeping all that stuff in mind, layer sculpting is important. You know, not just sculpting cloth, but the variety in which cloth comes in is, you know, is at a varying degree. So just making sure that you're aware that, you know, you're sculpting something that's like silk, or you're sculpting something that's puffy. Because even then, I think probably go in and inflate some of these areas a little bit. So I can inflate these to make them feel like they're kind of overlapping a bit more, and maybe you'll feel a bit more, you know. I might go a little too crazy first on folds, like as you know, and that's okay to just kind of map out like where all the tightness is, but you can see that I smoothed out like a big area here, and for me that actually feels a little better. I like sculpting out like that directionality of where you sculpt, where all the folds would be or would go, and then if you want to get rid of some later, you totally can. Sometimes it's helpful because it'll create a sense of, tautness in your sculpt or in your folds. I feel like detailing this episode will make it feel help me think about how I want to finalize and finish up, other parts of the school. So we want to bring that up to a certain finish, and then we can start, adding more stuff on top of it. So now I'll move on to making this. And my reference is kind of like a weird leather folded strap thing. So what we can do, they can kind of low poly model some folds in there and then kind of accentuate that. So we do something like this. So I'm going to insert some edge on it. And then you can scale them down based on the whole thing. So you can immediately get some creases. Then we can kind of pull little sections out, bring it up. So you kind of want to poly model some scoops. So fold in there first. And see how that feels. Maybe in the back is where stuff sticks out. I know it seemed really messy at first, which is very good. Have I ever led you guys wrong? Like low poly modeling directionality of where you want your folds is going to help when you subdivide it, especially for just 3D printing stuff or for treating it like a maquette. Just trying to see where those fold overlaps are going to be. I'll help you a little bit. Maybe this one side's pushed up more. So again, I want to add like a pretty nice amount of asymmetry. To the character. In our ref, it can be like this kind of like two-part thing. So if we wanted to do that, we can insert an edge loop here. We can get rid of one part, it's like hidden, and then we can use from the topological to create an overlap. And then we can, combine it later with like a belt or something like that. It's a really easy way to just create overlap and maybe again, I'm kind of ideating it at low poly to see how this feels first, and then I'm happy with where it's at. So the question from Twitch is, he missed it, but the color scheme chosen from nightly colors looks very classic blue and yellow. Yeah, so I mean, if you look up a lot of medieval night stuff, you'll find that they're very, very colorful. One color palette I was running into a lot was actually green and red, which is the color of our previous character. So I wanted to try to find something that was different. Blue and white's really common, yellow and blue's really common. Reds, purples sometimes, but purple's a really, really expensive color to make back in the day. So usually purple, that's why it kind of stands for royalty most of the time, because it took like 12,000 muscles to get, like a little bottle of purple dye. So, yeah, purple was always saved for, see, I knew I wanted to do something different, and then I got distracted with purple dye. But yeah, creating, purple dye from moss was really expensive back in the day. So it was always saved for royalty. I'll probably put like a strap across here, or like maybe some string or something, and something that like he wraps it and like ties it. Does this piece have to make sense that way? No, I'm just referencing something that looks kind of like that, but you can make up your own stuff along the way. Something like that's kind of cool. I think if it's made of leather, maybe there's a harder edge. So what we can do is also, I'll take this and make sure that that's all the same. Increase it. Now I have like a harder edge, but I don't want it to be that hard. And maybe I want this to be a little tighter too. So I can go in here and select this edge. We can probably group by normals, and we get kind of what we want. I can crease it, and again, I can change that crease level down to maybe like 1. And now I get a bit of a harder edge. Let's see if I crease it to like 2. And let's see what it looks like when I subdivide it to, 3. Okay, again, something like, a little nicer. And so it's just depending on, you can change these crease levels to see, what level of smoothness I'm looking for. I think I like crease level 2. So I'll keep it at that. And then you can either apply the applying it here will be a little different from actually, subdividing by hitting Control V. I'm going to go ahead and Control V. So by that you can see I get exactly what I was. If we want to do this, could be kind of like maybe a crinkled leather or something like that. Means the folds are going to be a lot sharper and probably like a little thicker because it's a hardier material. It's from Ecuador. I love Ecuador on Facebook. Nasty. Oh, okay, so if you start sculpting and you're like, why is nothing happening? Chances are it's flipped normals, and I have double on, so let's see if I'm right. So I'm gonna go ahead and go back before I subdivided it, because it's just easier. I haven't started sculpting on anything yet. So back there, if I turn off double, yep, it's flipped. So now I can just flip it. Now he subdivided, and now I should be able to start something on it. So now I'm going to start kind of sculpting in some of those, folds that I put into place. You can see how the topology that I put in place is going to help me do that. Not all of it, but if you, you can adjust what you can in the low poly, you definitely should. Because in the high poly, it'll just make your life a lot easier. So I'm going to make these pretty sharp. We'll have to think about later too, because, belt straps attached and maybe there's like a button or something like that. So there's going to be some tautness and something like that. And now we can use the same technique that I used before. Add some trim. So I can't do like do this. So I have this edge loop selected. I can hit expand Or I can subdivide once and then expand and be like, yeah, that trim's maybe a little better. Or you can subdivide again and expand. You can see how I can get like a thinner and thinner trim. So maybe I like something like that. So then I go way up, invert it, hide it. And then if I use my inflate brush, invert it, there we go. Use my inflate brush. I can inflate this and create like a cool little seam along the edge or a little trim. So again, the power of edge loops and having like clean topology for your stuff, this is why I like, you know, sculpting this way. It helps a lot with like this cleanliness and for editability and controllability. Nice, right? And then I can just keep sculpting on top of it. I wanted to show this kind of stuff because I feel like the last stream I went ahead and did a decent amount of this stuff without you guys seeing it, I think. But it was also just, you know, a lot of different stuff that we were doing on our last model. There's a lot of just little props and things, where this guy doesn't have as many props. We'll probably give him a sword at some point. But, you know, a lot of his stuff is more just sculptural, cloth sculpting and things like that. So just trying to show you guys that kind of process. And hopefully it's not too boring, and hopefully you're getting something out of it. Cool. That's always my goal. I want you guys to be happy and get something out of my being sitting here and talking and streaming. So I can subdivide this again, and then I can go in here with my polish. I like to change polish alpha to this little square here, and then I can change the focal shift. You can start kind of polishing. I get the right brush side. Polishing this up. And kind of creating little edges and things like that. Kind of sharpening some stuff. That focal shift might be a little too much, but yeah. I still have my smooth directional on. So when I smooth this way, those big form changes won't change. But I can kind of smooth out those little imperfections by sculpting it the other way, or smoothing it out the other way. And just so that you guys know, Move Topological uses, you know, topology-based stuff to move, but you can actually do that with every brush. I think if you go to brush, and I think if you go to modifiers, I could be wrong. I actually don't remember where it is. How sad is it? And I teach this because I've had it. So the reason I don't remember where it is, because I have it right here. So topological masking. So you can actually go to something like the pinch brush, for example. So see, I want to pinch just this part, but if I pinch it right now, it'll pinch the whole thing. But if I have pinch and I turn on that topological masking, well, maybe it's a masking then. Let's see, auto masking. There it is. See, we found it. So it's in auto masking topological. So if you turn that button on, You can do it for every single brush. I can now actually just focus on the one side without having to hide or mask anything, and I can just pinch this one side. To make that a little thinner, and then I can move it up and make sure that, you know, it's not crashing with another, or it just feels right, or it's squishing properly, or whatever it may be. You know, bring it up a little bit, like it's a little flat. I think those little details are always really fun to add. But yeah, you can put topological masking on everything. Sometimes when it's really high res, it might not load, but it takes a little bit more thought process for the ZBrush. So it might get a little slower, but it still works really, really well most of the time. And it'll stay on until you just turn it off. So that's why I have it there, because it's easiest to turn it on and off that way. Yeah, so now we have that. We can also, I'm just gonna select this, but in reality, I'm just selecting something that doesn't have subdivisions. So I can go into primitives, and I can pick this sphere. I think, in our case, I think it'd be cool just to add these little buttons. And then I'll make them, you know, like a goldish color or something. And now, now we know that there's like buttons that are going to attach it, right? We want to make sure that there's enough overlap for that to make sense. So I'm gonna move topological. Move that guy underneath there. I can solo it to make sure that I'm kind of moving it. Yellow button. If I want to, I can start adding thickness to some of this stuff as well. I'm going to get rid of this middle edge and extrude this out. Just so I can start feeling out those thicknesses, and I can go ahead and increase that too as well. So I'll do like a crease level of 2, and then a subdivision 3. I always like to give things like slight smoothing. If it's too sharp and crisp, even hard surface stuff, I'll do slight smoothing on, because anything that's too crisp will just feel really CG, and it won't feel very real. So you just want to make sure that you have a bit of realism to your edges. Now I can kind of start making sure that this is really sitting into the surface as well. Now it has like that. I'll also make sure and double check that I don't have double on anymore. So it has thickness. And if you start sculpting and adding subdivisions, having it be doubled is always going to be a problem. And you can see in this case, it's all just fully looped, which is fine. If anything, I could hide, you know, shoulder pauldron and take a look to see that it's making sure it's actually really sitting on the surface of my character. There you go. Now it really feels like it'll sit it properly, and then I can just turn it off. Oh, what should I tackle next? Okay, there's something interesting or different that we can do with the pants. It could be like a cool texture or something like that. It might not be realistic, but over here, this guy has this vest on. And I kind of like that it's got this like border thickness trim, and it's got this like studding. So what I'm thinking is maybe instead of just the studding everywhere, maybe the side of the pants or maybe the front of the pants has like some cool, you know, breakup like this, and then I can add like studding along it, and we can kind of replicate that same shape language on maybe it's like another element and things like that. Just to give it a bit more, you know, breakup, and see if that's something that we like or not. Just so that way the pants feel not so boring. I want to add some more interest to them. So right now I'm tackling all the soft squishy stuff because I feel like I have more of a plan for that than I do, you know, how I want to like texture the hard surface stuff at the moment, because we're still trying to figure out kind of the hard surfacing stuff. At least I'm still trying to figure that out. So that's why we're kind of going in and, you know, trying to finalize more of his soft gooey bits first. And then if I have time today, I mean, we'll see how long doing the pants will take. Then maybe I can start slowly trying to block out more of what the arm will be. And then this gauntlet actually is going to probably look something closer to, I kind of like this type of texture. So I think this is really cool. So I like these studs here, along with this cool quilting pattern with the glove. So I really like all the texture that's going on just within that one arm. So, you know, I think I want to try to replicate something similar, but within just like a bracer. So again, your reference doesn't have to be do exactly that thing. It's just taking little pieces of shape language that you're like, ooh, I think this is cool, or I like this a little bit, or I like this thing, and making it your own, and making it interesting. I think it's kind of the best way to use reference. We can also, I think we did this last time, if we wanted to, we can subdivide this up and we can go ahead and use, let me find it, dynamics. So we can go ahead and use a little bit of cloth simming if you want to. I like throwing this in. Like I said, I usually like to just sculpt cloth. You guys just saw me do that as a technique twice. So I'm just going to give another option that is also a really nice option. So I'm going to go ahead and hide everything except for him and the body of our character. So there we go. And I just want to make sure that to start, everything is on the outside of the character. And I'm just going to remember that there's some knee padding that's going to be bunching and whatnot. So I'm just going to make sure that I'll be adding that to our character later. So I will make sure that I don't need gravity because I'm not doing a simulation. You can leave it on because you're not going to simulate it anyway, but you can just calculate collision. And it'll calculate the collision of what's visible. So it's not thinking about anything else, like it's not thinking about the armor that I hid and all of the belts or anything. If you put too much, it's going to collide with too many things. The inflate is based on, you know, where that collision lies, but that depends on scale. So if I go right now to, you know, cloth nudge or something, I turn up the firmness and I start nudging this. You can see how it inflated a little bit. So that means that the inflate of one's a little too big. And usually if you stay in a decent scale, just go ahead and lower it. And then I'll move it again. And you can see now, see how close now I can get with the collision, but it will never collide into it. But you can see how I can nudge it really close to the surface. Now that I have that, I can change the firmness. Is if it's a firmness of 1, it means you're going to get really fine little wrinkles. So it's almost like silk or something like that as you move around. So as I push this down, you'll see you'll get like crazy tiny little folds. which isn't really the material that we're going for. And again, for stylized stuff, I feel like it's easier to make sure that the firmness is. I feel like a good rule of thumb is make it really firm at first to get your primary forms first. And then you can kind of like lower as you need to. I don't think I've ever really gone to 6 though, because 6 is really, really firm. And it's kind of hard to like move around. But I can start pulling some of this stuff up. And I'll start kind of nudging all this stuff around. I know that I want the bunching to happen down at the bottom because it's getting bunched in. The idea is that they're supposed to be pants, right? And then they're bunching into the armor and into his like kneecap protector thingies. I'm losing the name. So now that we kind of get something like that, I can lower the firmness to 4. And I'll try to get as much as I can out of the one nudging brush. And then if I feel like I need more folds or more detail than that, then I could use like the move, which will kind of not add pathology, but it'll really push the pathology way more. So I use like the cloth move. It'll move like everything. You can see I can move the like where the pant line is, and I can pull it up and down and do all sorts of stuff, which is cool because you can get really good folds. But if you're not careful with how you're pulling it, you can kind of pull your character's pants down. So I like trying to, I use it very carefully. I'll usually pull with the move a little bit, and then I'll go back to the cloth nudge, because the nudge will not move your pants too much, as long as you're not being super aggressive with it. If it was there. So you can just be a bit more choiceful where all that stuff is sitting. And sometimes, I mean, for me personally, I feel like it gets a little too blobby for my taste of stuff. But, you know, it gives you a decent base for feeling, you know, like if the tightness is here and I'm pulling the pants to bunch down, right? Or maybe this part's hitting his crotch or wherever it is. I can pull the nudge this back down. Maybe you can get kind of like a crotch fold. Step back a little bit. It's weird. See, it kind of depends, right? Because for me with that stuff, I do think it's just easier to sculpt it. Especially because, I mean, ZBrush's cloth sims are okay, but, you know, Blender or using Marvelous Designer is always going to give you really nice, accurate simulations. So if you want, like, really good pant folds and stuff, you would usually go into something like Marvelous Designer. Again, this can give you a decent enough base to kind of go with stuff. You might get some happy accents or overlaps or something like that that you weren't thinking of before. But yeah, again, I like to be more conscious about, you know, the folds that I'm making, because especially with stylized work. But you can see I can take what, you know, it gave me, and I can kind of start playing with it and giving it a bit more bagginess to the pants, and incorporating those, you know, Y shapes and those X shapes, folds. Try to think about, you know, where it's going to be bunching and stuff like that. Yeah, if you guys don't practice sculpting cloth a whole lot, you definitely should. It's really invaluable, and you'll learn a lot about just the way things sit on, anatomy, and like how do you show anatomy through, the tension of, a shirt or something like that. Because most characters are not going to be just fully naked or anything like that. So being able to know how to manipulate, cloth to accentuate folds and things, but also to not lose the anatomy underneath that you worked on as well, is super important, especially with stylized stuff. Bring back, now that we're done with the simulation stuff, we can bring all this stuff back and see what's looking good and what's looking weird. And with big folds like this and stuff, we can pinch these in certain areas. Polish it a little bit to get some really clean edging and stuff. Also, when you think about folds and things, it also depends on what you're making it for. In a medium where we're doing this for a maquette, then technically, until I actually pose him in the pose that he's going to be in for the statue, there's no point really in sculpting a whole lot of it, which is what I mentioned in our previous stream. Because I moved the hood around, I adjusted the pants and stuff on our previous character once he was posed. But for something like games, you kind of want folds that are slightly ambiguous. You don't want such an obvious fold of like, oh, this is him bending his arm, because what happens when he straightens his arm, and you still see all the good folding stuff baked into like your normal map or something like that, and then it kind of doesn't look like he straightened his arm, because you're like, why are all the folds not moving? Now they do have stuff where you can, we have animated normals or things like that, and we can go between different normals to simulate, off folds and things like that. But for stylized stuff, or for, low poly, hand painted texture games like Dota 2 or League of Legends or something like that, then you can't really get away with stuff like that. So it's all about like where you're viewing it from and what the asset calls for. Which is why this, being able to be a character artist for multiple films or games or sculpting statues, like there's always going to be a different challenge, and you're always going to approach it in different ways depending on what the end goal is ultimately, right? So YouTube says learning a lot. I'm glad. I want you to learn. I have fun sculpting, but ultimately, you guys are here to pick up some tips and trips. Oh no, I can't talk. Tricks and tips. Tips and tricks. It's been a long day. I'm just sharpening all these edges by going in and using like the polish brush, like I said before. And I can use my smooth directional to smooth out the edges that I don't want. I can also go, you can use pinch as well to like pinch these edges really hard. The one thing to note with that though is in certain times you might not want to use the pinch brush, because the more you pinch it, you can get a really hard edge, but you can see the topology gets really, really ugly. So again, for your high res, that might not matter, depending on what you're doing, but just be really aware that, pinching can be really deceiving because it looks good, but the way it gets there can be kind of messy. Same thing with using clay polish. So I do use clay polish every now and then, but usually in the beginning with like a Dynamesh, if you get some clay polish is, I can show you. So this one, clay polish is really cool because it'll sharpen a lot of stuff and it'll look cool. But the issue is, this is the topology now. Then if I do a clay polish, see how crinkly it gets? Because it's using like the same thing as pinching. But you can see that you're like, oh, whoa, it looks cool. It gets all like hard edged and stuff. And it's a really useful tool, but it does mess up your topology a lot. Look how wrinkly it is. So to combat that, what I actually do is I have my nice topology. I will duplicate it. I will run the clay polish on that, and I mess up my topology. And then I can smooth it out or like fix whatever. But then I can take that. I'll solo it. So now I have my crinkled gross topology, and now I have my nice one. And then I can just project it. So then I go down, it's going to say project all. And now you can see I have nice topology, but I also have the nice clay polish on top of that, that I can then work on top of. Instead of doing this crazy grossness that becomes kind of uneditable, and it just looks really bad. So you don't want to have like this type of topology. Again, for 3D printing or something, yes, you're going to decimate it at the end of the day, and who cares? But sometimes this stuff can get in the way because it's using topology from other places. It's kind of like redistributing it in really ugly ways that can become problematic later. But then you can delete that clay polish. But now I have this one that still has nice even topology. I can subdivide this back up to its normal res. And now I have the nice clay polish that I can work on top of with my good topology from before. That's a nice little tip that I suggest using if you're going to use clay polish. But a lot of time I'll use clay polish in the beginning stages of, it's helpful if you're blocking out like a stylized face, you can just use it. I use it more as like a safeguard or as like a check-in to see, what planes are reading, more than I use it to like actually sculpt stuff. So if you use clay polish on your face and you get like really nice planes from it, the proper planes of what a face has, then your sculpt is going in the right direction. So recall is your friend, or history recall as well. If you're if you want to just do one specific area, but project all will obviously project all of your mesh, which can be really helpful. Go ahead and bring everything back now. I'm wondering I think its pant color should be a different color. I'm not sure what yet though. I think maybe like some sort of like off bluish color or something like that. I'm trying to think of what would be nice because I don't want it to just be all like just leather. Or maybe it could be like a really subtle grayish green, that might work. I'm trying to think of colors that can go with that. A warmish red. I'll play with it. I'm thinking a cool color though. I kind of want a cool. Ooh, purple might work. A darker purple, not a saturated purple. A really low saturated purple, maybe. We'll see. Yeah, purple's not bad, right? I'll go with whatever Sim says. And then this tapestry, I also am going to do the split color with, and we can also add like a trim like we did for this one. So we can do that right now. This one I could model the trim in first, Again, I'm all about showing you guys different methods, so we could do the part where we actually model in the trim. What I'm also going to do is insert some, if it will let me, I'll insert some edge loops into here. You can do this by hand, like I just did, or you can also, when you insert an edge loop, you can say multiple edge loops and you can pick a resolution. I already did it, so I'll just leave it as is. But I just want some resolution there. And then I will go ahead and extrude polygroups all like this. And then we can do it again on this side. And you can see now we have a nice little trim. I want to keep it nice and pointed though. So if you want, I don't really need these two lines anymore, so I can just get rid of them. And then I could probably just do a group by normals. The group by normals, we'll see what we get. And we should get this being pointed, so now if I crease it and subdivide it, it should get the outer edge to be proper, and I do. And then the other thing is, the reason why this happens, you can see the smoothing, is because this yellow part wants to smooth because it doesn't have a crease on this edge. So to fix that, you can just polygroup the tops and the bottoms. These are going to be separate colors because I want the creasing to stay there. And then you can see it goes away. Now that I have that, I can see what it'll look like with maybe a subdiv of, we had 1 or 2 before, so we have that. We can play with the dynamic subdiv to see what it'll look like at, 3. Maybe 1's not enough, maybe 2. 2's looking okay. I'm going to make sure that I fix the back as well. In my shaky hand, that's what happens. I make a lot of mistakes all the time. That's okay. There we go. So now we have something like that. This might be a little too thick. So one thing that we can do is, because we extruded the back side too, is we can actually key mesh this back. So Q-mesh is really awesome. Q-mesh is super, super useful. So Q-mesh is like extruding, but it will kind of snap to surfaces. So if I do polygroup all, it should just snap back. Yep, there you go. So now it's snapped back to not being visible. So Q-mesh is super handy because if I just do one polygon, I'll show you what I can do. It will try to, I can show this on like a second. I Q-mesh this up, and then I Q-mesh the one next to it. It'll kind of snap, and you can kind of do stepping and beveling. And you can bring this one up, and it'll snap. You can pick these ones, and this will snap up to this. If you extrude this out, it'll snap. So it does this really cool, like snapping, extruding type technique. That's really easy to make adjustments, like what I just did, where I had a border in the back that I didn't want anymore. So I just Q-meshed it and had it stitched back together. You can also really easily create holes. So I can Q-mesh that straight through and create like a hole if I wanted to. Really, really easy stuff to be able to manipulate and adjust. So with Q-mesh, it's a fun tool. Alright, cool. So now that I have that, I can subdivide this. Now we have. Alright, so now I can go to my lowest and I can select this side, divide it back up, flip it, select this, fill that object, and now I have this little tapestry. And I can kind of move this around now. Synth is asking, speaking of polls, do I use a Boolean feature a lot in my workflow? And the answer is yes. I do a lot of creature work now, but for hard surfacing stuff, absolutely. It's definitely the way to go. Well, Lisa, it's definitely the way to go if you are doing stuff in ZBrush. And if you're 3D printing stuff, or if you're creating like a high res for a game model, you know, and all these little nuts and bolts and seam lines and all this stuff doesn't need to be in your, you know, low poly, then it makes it a lot easier because you can keep your low poly, but then you can just Boolean out a bunch of detail and then bake it, and they'll match perfectly and they'll line right on top of one another. So it's super, super easy to be able to make those adjustments. So this is too thick for me, so I'm just gonna kind of taper it so that way it's thick at the top, but it kind of thins out by the bottom. Just so it feels more like a, you know, actual cloth or something. Do that. And then we can go in here and put some more little draperies. And these shouldn't be anything too crazy. Just wherever there's going to be tension points. So if it's hanging down from something, you know, there's going to be tension points there. Oops, change the intensity a little bit. That stuff out. Just give a little bit of light to your little tapestry. This could also change. Again, I'll probably say that all the time. Because it changes a lot depending on, you know, once we pose it. And I did it again. I constantly am flipping my stuff. That's okay. I noticed the smooth wasn't working for back face, and it usually means that stuff's flipped. Cool. So now you can see that we've kind of got like all the little cloth stuff figured out and got some little trimming and things. We can obviously make adjustments along the way. Eventually, my plan is to, and I could do it now, but I could probably do it, you know, maybe more as a final result or as a final texture. But I want to make some textures like, oops, let me bring this guy over again, good old Jude Law. So I definitely want to get some cool tallable pattern on here. So I'm going to find or either make, maybe it'll be little acorns. It's going to be little acorns, I decided. So we're going to make little acorns as like a little way to mask this and create like a little pattern. And then we're going to colorize it like that. So that'll add tons of really cool detail to it later. But I'm going to do that through the surface noise. So I got to UV it and stuff first as well. But I don't know if I want to do that right now because we have about 15 minutes left or so. But next time around, we'll probably do, you know, yellow acorns on one side, and then, I don't know, something else. We gotta come up with something else that'll be on the side. Something less busy, you know, because there is a little bit of detailing in our reference. He's got something, so maybe just like a simple insignia or something like that. We can kind of come up with something and see what would be fun. But that's kind of the plan. So, you know, being aware that this isn't final and knowing that this is going to be way busier later on, along with this, will also help a lot too. So there you go. For now, I'll keep sculpting on the pants. So make those like little borders and stuff that I talked about a little while ago. We can do one or two things. I'm gonna go ahead and probably just duplicate this. I'm gonna duplicate it. We can think about now the topology isn't. The topology's okay, but we can Topology for the side is fine, so we can go ahead and do that. So I'll delete higher. I'm also gonna get rid of this dynamics panel because I don't need it. And I'm gonna go ahead and grab. I'm gonna put it more towards the front. So grab this edge and this edge. Edge, maybe one more edge. I'm gonna grab the third edge. Hidden. So I have something that lays right on top. And then I can go ahead and say extrude larger ball. So you can do that method, or what I'm also thinking that might work. I'm gonna try it, see if it works. Actually, what I'll do is I'll grab that same selection, so I'll duplicate it again. Again, experimenting with you guys. I'm gonna grab the first three. These three. I'm gonna go ahead and, because I like having subdivisions of things, so as long as I don't mess the geometry up, I should be able to go to the highest subdivision. Lower. Now I have that. Just wondering. Now let's see, my thought process is it lies directly on top. And if you wanted to, I guess you could do extrude on that. The issue with this though is it's not as editable probably as the other option. You can see that that sits directly on top. But there's other methods to doing this, so you know, that's one method, but the other way you could. So what I'll actually do is instead of subdividing or extruding out, I'll extrude inward. So I'll extrude in, and then I can subdivide it. I'll actually crease it first. That's probably gonna be the better thing. So I'm going to crease this, subdivide it, and then I'm going to mask this top part here. And then what I can do is I can hide this and just show the pants. Not this part, the pants. And then I can run a project, right? So I can run a project all. I can, if it doesn't project super well, you can just sink it into the surface a bit more. It's always flip, man. Look at it, flippity flip flops. It's always flipped. How do I do this to myself? Okay. Things look so broke. There we go. Now I'm going to project all. Yes, that's happy the way I want to. So now I can project all into this and get my creases back. I think I accidentally smoothed out. Where did I smooth it out? There we go. I can get those creases back, and then what I can do is I can just pull it out. And you can put like a little seam line on there. Darker, lighter. Gotta figure out the colors. So you can do something like that, but also you can use the history recall brush to do something like this too, to kind of like mimic what's underneath it. But then you have subdivision levels along with the same topology and this. So then if you wanted to, I'm gonna go ahead and delete. Distribute. I have this and this, and they're all the same thing. They're not flipped. I'm going to merge them down. Now I have these, and then I can go ahead and like keep sculpting on this. I'm just going to keep using the same seeding technique that I've been using. That's the thing too, is if you pick one way to, you know, add seams to your work, you should probably stick with that same way so it looks consistent. Obviously, you know, seams can change from one thing to another, but it's probably a good idea just to try to keep it consistent, you know. I forgot these are not symmetrical. So I'm gonna try that whole seam in there first, and then I can go in and adjust this stuff. Someone on Twitch, Synth, is asking, what do I think about ZBrush 2023? Any cool features? Okay, I've not tried it yet. It just came out, but the one cool feature that I'm very excited for is redshift right within ZBrush. So ZBrush will have like actually cool rendering. So I'm very curious to see what that is going to look like and how that's going to behave. Because I haven't experimented with it. So I'm curious to see kind of like what the limitations of it are. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one. That one's super fun and super cool. So, because I'm a big fan of just staying in the same program for as long as possible. When it comes to, you know, if I'm doing like concepting work or something like that, or trying to sell, you know, my sculpt to client or to my director or supervisor or whatever it is, be able to just, you know, render out a really nice looking ZBrush sculpt right within ZBrush instead of having to export it out or decimate it to bring it into, you know, Unreal Engine or to bring it into Marmoset or whatever, Keyshot, stuff like that. I can just do it right within ZBrush and call it a day. Something nice. So we're gonna play with it and see what happens. I haven't messed with Redshift yet either. I just know of it as a separate program, and I know lots of people have used it for like concept and stuff, and it was kind of a competitor of Keyshot from what I understand. But I haven't really played with it much either. But anything, it will probably be better to render with rather than doing like a BPR render. Because BPR renders in here, you know, I mean, you can adjust the light and you can render. It's just that the shadows are really intense and it's not very realistic at all. You know, it's not like there's going to be bounce light or there's going to be anything really interesting going on. In ZBrush, you have to set a lot of that stuff up for it to look good. Whereas right off the bat in something like Redshift, where it's ray trace rendering, or Marmoset's, you know, real-time rendering with some cool ray tracing cheats, then yeah, it's something really fun to play with. Yeah, I think I got my pants in. I could always add more seam lines and stuff later, but it also depends on how much I'm going to see of it. I could add some seam lines to make it look like the tail comes out at the proper place. But yeah, so we kind of finished up a lot of the, you know, sculpting of all of his cloth stuff, and then next week we'll probably finish off his hard surface stuff. I'll probably finish the bracer offline, you know, because it's very similar to all the stuff that we're doing here. And then we can figure out how we're going to steampunk out his arm next week. And then I would think that after that it would be, you know, maybe creating his sword and posing him. And that would be wrapping up January's character. That's kind of my plan. So hopefully I can stick to it and we can, you know, make something cool out of it. So until next week, thanks for joining in. appreciate you guys watching me sculpt our little chipmunk brute character. Excited to give him a big sword, excited to pose him, and see what that looks like. So I think he's coming along, and I think it'll be really fun once we get that neck arm working. So again, I'm Ashley. This is Archetypes, sponsored by Lenovo. I'm here every Tuesday from 4 to 6, and usually Synth is here too, so I appreciate that. And we will catch you guys next week as we keep wrapping up this food character. All right, bye.